10 minutes. That is the entire warning California gets if the fault sitting off its northern coast decides to snap tonight. Not hours. Not the comfortable buffer you see in disaster movies where a scientist runs into a briefing room waving a printout. 10 minutes from the first jolt to the first wave hitting Crescent City. And honestly, most people living up there have never once heard that number said out loud. Here is the part that should keep you up at night. The wave that matters most to California does not always come from across the ocean. We have been trained to think of tsunamis as slow Pacific travelers. You think of a massive quake in Japan or Chile, followed by a full day of moving ships and clearing beaches. Sometimes that is exactly how it happens. But the deadliest scenario, the one seismologists in Oregon and California actually lose sleep over, is homegrown. It starts a few dozen miles offshore, and the ocean is already climbing the beach before your phone even finishes buzzing. Let me show you why. If you run your finger up a map of the West Coast, past San Francisco, past the Redwoods, all the way to where California hands off to Oregon, you find a massive seam in the planet hidden under cold gray water. It is called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. It stretches roughly 700 miles, from Cape Mendocino in Northern California up to Vancouver Island in Canada. Along that seam, the Juan de Fuca plate is grinding underneath the North American plate. It is happening slowly, constantly, and for now, mostly silently. That silence is the problem. Cascadia is not relaxed. It is completely stuck. The two plates are locked together, and the land above is bending like a diving board with someone standing on the very tip. Every year, that pressure builds. When a locked megathrust like this finally releases, it does not do it politely. It ruptures along hundreds of miles at once, drops the seafloor, and shoves an entire column of ocean upward in seconds. That is your tsunami. It is not built over hours. It is built in the span of a single shaking event that hasn't even stopped yet. Now, why does California specifically get so little warning? It comes down to pure geography. The southern hinge of Cascadia sits practically on top of the California-Oregon border. Crescent City, which is a small harbor town in Del Norte County, is one of the closest sizable communities to that rupture zone. When the seafloor lifts offshore, the water does not need to cross an ocean to reach Crescent City. It just needs to cross the last few miles of continental shelf. At tsunami speeds in deep water, which is comparable to a jetliner, before slamming to a crawl and rearing up in the shallows, that trip takes somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. There is no time to convene a committee. There is barely time to run. And if the name Crescent City rings a faint bell, it should. California has already lived through this once, just not from its own fault. On Good Friday, in March of 1964, the ground tore open up in Alaska. It was the second largest earthquake ever recorded, a magnitude 9.2 monster that lasted around 4.5 minutes. The seafloor heaved. The Pacific took the punch, and it passed it along. Waves radiated south down the coast all night. Most towns got warnings, got nervous, saw a few feet of surge, and called it a scare. Crescent City got hit like a hammer. The tsunami arrived in a series of waves, and the deadliest one was not the first. That is a detail people forget, and it kills them. The first wave rolled in and then pulled back. People who had evacuated came back down to the harbor to check on their boats, to clean up, or just to see what happened. Then, the fourth wave came. It was the big one, over 20 feet in places, and it swept through the downtown. It tore buildings off foundations, tossed cars, and flattened around 30 blocks of the business district. 11 people died in Crescent City that night. A tanker's fuel ignited, and logs from the lumber yards became battering rams in the water. That was a wave that had traveled all the way from Alaska, with hours of transit time. It still caught people, because they did not understand that a tsunami is not one single wave. It is a train of them, and the later cars can be the worst. Now sit with this for a second. If a distant Alaskan quake could do that to Crescent City with hours of lead time, what happens when the quake is right there, offshore, and the lead time is 10 minutes? The modern warning system was built to answer that question, and the honest answer is unsettling. Here is how the machinery actually works, because it is genuinely impressive, but also genuinely limited. The West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center, the people whose job is to catch these things, rely on a two-part system. First, seismometers detect the earthquake almost instantly to estimate its size and location. Second, sensors on the seafloor, called dart buoys, measure the actual pressure of the water column passing overhead. This confirms whether a real tsunami wave is moving through the deep ocean. For a distant tsunami coming from Japan, Chile, or Alaska, this system is a gift. The wave takes hours to cross the Pacific, so the buoys confirm it, the models refine the arrival times, and coastal California gets a genuine warning with time to act. That part works, and it has absolutely saved lives. But a Cascadia tsunami, born a few miles off Crescent City, is a different story. By the time a dart buoy far out in the ocean registers anything useful, the wave has already arrived on shore. The confirmation comes after the fact. For this local scenario, the technology simply cannot outrun physics. The only warning that matters is the one written into the ground itself. Every emergency planner in Northern California repeats this until they are hoarse. If you are on the coast and the ground shakes so hard you cannot stand up, and it goes on for a minute or more, that is your warning. Nobody is going to call you. Nobody is going to text you in time. The earthquake is the alarm. When it stops, you go up. Head for higher ground on foot immediately, and do not go back for anything. Because a local Cascadia event looks brutal on the ground in a way the 1964 event wasn't. In 1964, the shaking happened in Alaska, so Crescent City's buildings were intact when the water came. In a local Cascadia rupture, you get both disasters at once. The shaking comes first, buckling roads, cracking overpasses, and dropping bridges. Then, while people are still stunned and disoriented, while cell towers are down and roads are split, the ocean comes in. The disasters stack. Driving away may not even be an option because the shaking just wrecked your route out. That is why the plan has to be your feet, not your car. Let me pull back and give you the scale of what Cascadia can actually produce, because the numbers are hard to hold in your head. Scientists have reconstructed the fault's history by reading the coastline like a logbook. They look at buried marshes, layers of sand shoved inland, and ghost forests of dead cedar trees killed when the land suddenly dropped and saltwater flooded their roots. These records show that Cascadia produces great earthquakes, magnitude 8 and even magnitude 9, on an irregular cycle, averaging roughly every few hundred years. The most famous entry in that logbook is dated January 26, 1700, around 9 o'clock at night. We know this with startling precision because across the Pacific and Japan, records from that era describe an orphan tsunami. It was a wave that came ashore and did damage without any local earthquake felt beforehand. Japanese villages recorded flooded fields and swamped houses along their coast, and nobody knew what caused it. For centuries, it was a mystery. Modern scientists cracked it by working backward. They matched the Japanese tsunami records with the tree ring death dates of those drowned Cascadia forests and the geological evidence of a sudden coastal drop. The math lined up perfectly. The orphan tsunami in Japan was the child of a magnitude 9 earthquake on the Cascadia Subduction Zone, the exact same seam sitting off California and Oregon right now. A wave born off the American West Coast crossed the entire Pacific and struck Japan around 10 hours later. Think about the reverse of that. If Cascadia can throw a wave clear across the ocean to Japan, imagine what it delivers to the coastline sitting right on top of it. That 1700 event is the benchmark. The uncomfortable arithmetic is that it has been over 3 centuries since Cascadia last did a full magnitude 9 rupture. The average interval isn't a countdown clock because the Earth does not run on a schedule, but the strain has been accumulating the whole time. Every year the plates stay locked, the debt grows. When it's paid in full and all at once. So what does the actual tsunami map look like for California? Let's get specific, because vague fear helps nobody. Crescent City is the sharpest edge of the risk. Its harbor has a shape and an underwater topography that funnels and amplifies incoming waves. It has been struck by tsunamis more often than almost anywhere else on the continental U.S. Coast after the 1964 disaster the town rebuilt, but the geography that made it vulnerable is still there. It is still a bowl the ocean can pour into. Then there was 2011, when the magnitude 9.1 Tōhoku earthquake hit Japan and sent that horrifying tsunami across the Pacific. California felt the reach of it. The waves that arrived in Crescent City were not catastrophic on the scale of what hit Japan, but they were enough to destroy boats, smash docks, and cause tens of millions of dollars in damage to the harbor. One man was swept out to sea while photographing the surge near the mouth of the Klamath River, and his body was never recovered. Even a minor, distant tsunami killed someone in California in 2011. That is how little margin the ocean gives you. Down the coast, the exposure changes, but it does not vanish. San Francisco Bay, Santa Cruz, and the harbors of Southern California face real risk from distant Pacific tsunamis, and for the southern coast, from more local faults and undersea landslides. But the specific horror of the 10-minute warning belongs to the far north, to the stretch nearest Cascadia's grip. That is where local rupture equals near zero lead time. Now, I want to challenge something, because a lot of coverage of this stops at telling you to be afraid, and that is lazy. The real story isn't just that a wave is coming. It's that we know it's coming, we've mapped where it goes, and whether it becomes a tragedy or a survivable event comes down almost entirely to what people do in the first few minutes. Those minutes are decided long before the ground ever shakes. California and Oregon have poured serious effort into this. There are official tsunami hazard maps showing inundation zones down to the street level. There are evacuation route signs, the blue ones with the wave symbol and the arrow pointing to higher ground, bolted along coastal roads. There are boundary signs telling you the exact moment you cross into and out of danger. Schools in these towns run drills. Some communities have built vertical evacuation structures, which are reinforced towers designed to hold people above the water when there isn't a hill close enough to reach in time. That last idea matters more than it sounds. On a flat stretch of coast, telling people to run to high ground is useless advice. If the nearest high ground is 3 miles away, you have 10 minutes. And the roads are broken. So engineers designed buildings strong enough to survive both the shaking and the wave, tall enough to lift hundreds of people above the flood, and close enough that a person on foot, like a kid, an elderly resident, or someone in a wheelchair, can actually reach them. The first of these in the United States went up in Washington State at a school in Westport. And the concept is spreading precisely because someone did the brutal math on how far a human can run in the time available. But here is the gap that worries me most: awareness. You can build every sign and tower in the world, but if a tourist rents a beach house in Crescent City for the weekend and has no idea what a minute of violent shaking means, that infrastructure doesn't help them. A huge fraction of people on any given beach on any given day are visitors. They didn't grow up with the drills. They see the ocean pull back, which is one of the classic tsunami warning signs, where the water suddenly retreats far past the low tide line and exposes the seafloor, and instead of running, they walk toward it to look. They want to take pictures or collect the flopping fish. That is not hypothetical. It happens in nearly every tsunami. Curiosity walks people directly into the wave. The receding water is not a spectacle. It is the ocean loading up before it swings. So let's plant that firmly. 3 signals mean run, and you don't wait for confirmation of any of them. Long, strong shaking, water suddenly withdrawing from the shore, or a loud roar coming off the ocean like a train or an airplane. If you experience any one of those near the coast, you head inland and uphill on foot. Keep going until you are well above and well beyond the marked zone, and stay there for hours. Remember Crescent City in 1964. The killer was the 4th wave, not the first. Let's widen the lens, because the 10-minute number deserves its full context. Cascadia is the marquee threat, but California's tsunami risk isn't a single villain. Undersea landslides can generate local waves with almost no warning. There are distant subduction zones all around the Pacific Rim in Alaska, the Aleutians, Japan, Kamchatka, and Chile. Any of these can send waves California's way with a more forgiving hours-long lead time. The distant ones are the scenarios where the system works. The near-field Cascadia one is the scenario where you are on your own for the first 10 minutes. Both are real, but only one gives you a chance to check your phone. And I will be blunt about something the polite coverage tends to soft pedal. The economic and human toll of a full Cascadia rupture would be staggering, and not just from the wave. Studies modeling a magnitude 9 event across the Pacific Northwest project catastrophic damage. Highways severed, bridges down, coastal communities cut off, and thousands potentially killed across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California, with the tsunami accounting for a grim share of the deaths in the immediate coastal strip. This isn't fringe speculation. It's the baseline planning scenario that emergency agencies across 3 states actually prepare against. They have named it, they run exercises for it, and they know it is a matter of when, not if. They just can't tell you the year. That uncertainty is the cruelest part. If someone could say Cascadia ruptures in 2031, every town would be ready. Instead, the fault gives no date. It could be tonight while you are watching this, or it could be 80 years from now. The strain does not care about your calendar. Because there is no deadline forcing action, the natural human response is to defer. We assume it won't happen during our lifetime, our vacation, or our Tuesday. That psychology, more than any gap in technology, is what turns a known hazard into a mass casualty event. Here is what I find genuinely hopeful, though, because I don't want to leave you entirely in the dark. The single most powerful tool in this entire system costs nothing and requires no buoy, no satellite, and no cell signal. It is knowledge. A person who understands that long shaking means run has a dramatically better survival chance than a person who waits for an official all clear that will never arrive in time. In places where tsunami education is drilled into the culture, where kids know the routes by heart and the whole town has internalized the idea that the earthquake is the warning, survival rates in local events climb enormously. The wave is exactly the same, but the outcome is completely different. The variable is what is in people's heads. That is why I wanted to talk about this. Not to scare you off the California coast. It is one of the most beautiful stretches of shoreline on the planet, and you should absolutely go. But go informed. If you are standing on a beach in Crescent City, or Eureka, or anywhere along that northern coast, and the ground starts to move and won't stop, don't wait for a siren. Don't wait for your phone. Don't wait to see if it gets worse. Move uphill, inland, on foot, right now. When you get high, you stay high, because the sea is going to keep coming back in waves for hours. And the biggest one might be the last one you'd expect. 10 minutes. That is the margin. It sounds impossibly short, and it is. But 10 minutes is enough time to save your life if you already know, before the shaking ever starts, exactly what you are going to do with them. The fault off California isn't a maybe. It is a certainty on a timeline nobody can read. The only real question is whether the people standing on that beach when it finally lets go will understand what the ground is telling them. The water withdrawing isn't a wonder to photograph. It's the ocean taking a breath, and you do not want to be there when it exhales.